Okay, now everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
My wife muted me. That happens a lot. She doesn't like it at home.
Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah, we can share how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Where are you, Laura?
I'm in Ontario, Canada.
Oh, you are? Okay. I'm from Toronto.
Oh, well, so you'll be happy to know it's snowing like crazy at the moment.
Oh, wow. And where are you, Helen?
I'm in England at the moment, but I live in Portugal, but I'm also from Canada.
Wow, we're all over. And where are you, Stuart?
I live in Wisconsin.
Oh, nice.
Oh, okay.
Nice home. Very pretty.
Yeah. So I just got the message. I believe that we are live here.
Oh, okay. Well.
Yes. So now everybody knows where we live. Great. So I guess we should begin. I don't know if there's traditionally a delay to allow people to, who may be latecomers or whatever, but I think we'll just go ahead and begin. Seems like the right thing to do. All right. Not getting any pushback on that, so here we go. All right. Well, so on behalf of Beacon House School System, I would like to welcome you to this World of Tomorrow event, From Darkness to Light. The Beacon House is the organizer here, and this is the 12th edition of School of Tomorrow events, and it is fully virtual. The nonprofit School of Tomorrow event series was launched by Beacon House in 2000 to help inform the direction of the organization, while also engaging global communities and conversations, shaping the future of schools and societies. And I was fortunate enough to be in Kuala Lumpur about 8 years ago for one of the events. And it was a great gathering of people from all over the world, and both presenters and teachers. So my name is Stuart Stotts, and I am coming, if you didn't hear in the beginning, from Wisconsin. I am a musician, storyteller, and an author. Before March, I was a world traveler as a presenter in places, many places from Tanzania to Kuala Lumpur to Moscow to Qatar, Europe, and many other places, working with teachers and students. And my newest book is called Beyond Nice, Nurturing Kindness in Young Children. So I've been fortunate to work all over the place, and I'll be introducing our panelists in just a moment. We've got 50 minutes. Or maybe 50 minutes for discussion, maybe 47. And at the end of that, there will be 10 minutes for questions and answers. And you can put the any questions you may have into the chat feature, which should be part of the format that we're working with here. And we'll gather those and get to as many of those as we can. And I have no doubt that with our esteemed panelists, we will be able to at least give good responses, if not final answers to questions that may come along here. I've been given a sort of a context for this to read for you to set the mood and the intention, to explore the context of resilience and how in particular the named resilience quotient can be developed in young children. We want to make sure that people leave with something useful, an idea, a perspective, a strategy that can make a difference in your work with children, whether you're here as a parent or a teacher. So if you're not getting something that you feel like is going to take you forward, feel free to put that in the chat, and hopefully we can provide something for you. 4 questions to think about here. What challenges are young children facing today, particularly as a result of this pandemic that's spread across the world? Are the challenges more acute? How do they relate to challenges that any child faces at any time? Bearing in mind also the issues of equity. What are the differences for children coming from more privileged backgrounds versus those from more economically challenged? How can resilience protect and promote academic performance? What's the connection between resilience and ability to learn and achieve in school? How can parents, schools, and society at large support young children in developing resilience, this resilience quotient, as it's named? And also in the sort of biggest picture, perhaps, question, how can schools help change these archaic mindsets associated with mental health? We see that continuing to progress as time goes by. What's schools' role in looking at that? So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then to get us started, I have a series of questions, but before we do that, because it's my role as moderator, I get to make these choices. I'm going to do a quick song to sort of bring the arts into this moment as well. But let me introduce our panelists to you first. Dr. Monica Nicoll has an MA in counseling psychology and a PhD in educational leadership and research methodology. She was a professional figure skater and skating coach. And I don't know if we're going to see any video of that today, but I certainly would be very interesting. She has a holistic approach to personal growth, wellness, and resilience. And she is co-director at the Resilience Counseling and Training Center in the USA, providing counseling, coaching, consulting, and training services. Dr. William Nicoll, also known as Bill, I believe you two are related because you seem to be in the same panel anyway, received a master's in education and counseling from Boston University and a PhD in counseling from the University of Arizona. Renowned consultant on issues relating to children, families, schools, and mental health. Bill has been a consultant for the U.S. Department of State's Office of Overseas Schools and for international schools, and is co-director with, I believe, Monica there at the Resilience Counseling and Training Center. Two more to introduce. Dr. Helen Maffini from the UK, an international educator, author, and consultant, worked all over the world. She's been a school principal and a teacher, and is a certified emotional intelligence trainer and positivity psychology leader. Her research for her doctorate focused on preschool mindfulness, and she sees her mission to improve the lives of children by promoting wellness, social, and emotional learning. And Ms. Laura Christmann, coming from Toronto. She has a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Education from Ontario Universities and a master's degree from the New School in New York City. She's taught extensively in Ontario, including being a kindergarten demonstration teacher. She taught in Glasgow as an exchange teacher and also worked in Abu Dhabi as a classroom teacher and school leader. So again, not to talk too long, unfortunately, but there are things to get through here. The World Health Organization in 2020 issued a joint leaders statement calling on governments, organizations, and society at large to take steps to reduce the impact of COVID-19 on children in every country. The statement reads, slightly paraphrased, a third of the global population has been on global 19 lockdown, impacting more than 1.5 billion children. Movement restrictions, loss of income, isolation, overcrowding, and high levels of stress and anxiety have increased the likelihood that children experience, observe psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. Those are some experiences we want to consider as we are talking about this. So let me do you a quick song here, and then we'll be ready to hear, and we're going to hear first of all from Dr. Nicoll, Dr. William Nicoll, there are two there, I wanted to begin with a very quick song for young children, written by a friend of mine named Bruce O'Brien, because one thing I believe is that the arts have a significant role in shaping children's lives. The arts live in emotion, and that's where we learn. So the song goes like this. Let's see if I can bring this guitar in. Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? I am brave and you are brave and I'm brave too. Now, on these online platforms, we can't really make music together, But I'm going to do that again. And if you'd like to sing along with it right where you are, hopefully that the people in your household will be forgiving. We can start off this conference session singing. Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? I am brave and you are brave and I'm brave too. Now I chose this song out of hundreds of possibilities for a couple reasons. Because it's got this idea of being brave. Facing, this was actually written by in collaboration with a 3-year-old. And this is what she said: I am brave, you are brave, and I'm brave too. Isn't that just like a 3-year-old? So we'll sing it one more time and then we'll get on with the talking. Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? Won't you be my partner to walk in the woods? I am brave, you are brave, and I'm brave too. And so I would like to invite you to be our partners here for the next 45 minutes or so, because building resilience is not simply a matter of individuals, but it is a matter that we something that we do in collaboration all together. We are not just individuals, we're connected. So let me begin here by asking Dr. William Nicoll to respond to this question to get us started. I think that no one would say that resilience isn't an important aspect of life. Right? I think we could all, whatever partisan side we might be on, we would all agree with that. But perhaps you could begin by giving us some sort of a way to think about resilience, what it is, what research has shown us, how we can foster it. Set the big picture here for us. And then is this idea of a resilience quotient something new, or is it just sort of repurposed language that we've known for hundreds of years? So if you could get us started with that conversation, and then we'll move on.
Okay, well, I should be able to cover that in 45 minutes, and everybody else can take the last 3.
And he's not kidding.
I've seen me do that. Yeah, the best way that I shared to begin with, I started with, in terms of, I think of it as a social vaccine, a psychosocial vaccine. These are the skills we need to get through life and to protect us from. Life is full of obstacles. Life is full of setbacks. Life is full of change. How do we handle that and move forward? And so I like to think there was a man named Dr. Jonas Salk who developed a little thing called the polio vaccine. And on the 35th anniversary of that discovery, he was asked, if you were a young researcher today, on what would you focus? And he said, I'd still focus on immunization, except now I'd focus on the psychological rather than the biological. And I kind of think that's what resilience is. It's a psychosocial vaccine, protecting their kids from the difficulties they'll have in life, but at the same time, helping them develop a positive, goal-directed, fulfilling direction in their lives, but at the same time, with those skills, able to handle setbacks, obstacles, difficulties, and be able to bounce back up. Not bounce back, because as you said, some kids don't have anything back to go to. We've seen kids coming from terrible situations, but to bounce back up and continue to adjust and continue moving forward. That's a resilient person. That's a mentally healthy person. And that's what we're really trying to develop. And again, I'd say if schools have focused only on 3/4 of their task. The 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, but they've got the 4th one is resilience, because both of those together are what's necessary to be successful in life and live a happy life and a mentally healthy life. So we're trying to reintroduce the idea of the 4th R. And I'll say one last thing, and then I'll shut up before my wife kicks me under the table. And that is that, no, this is not a new idea. We can go back to Aristotle, who said, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. In the United States in 1781, we had what the first major school open to the public called Phillips Exeter Academy, which is only about 2 hours away from us and still exists. And their mission statement in 1781 was, first and foremost, the minds of our instructors has to be the development of the moral character, resilience, if you would, in today's language, as well as the academic. For knowledge without, I should say, character without knowledge is weak and feeble, but knowledge without character is dangerous. And we can all give a long list of very bright people, very competent people who are dangerous in this world. And so in educating, raising children, I want to make sure they have both the knowledge to be in life in terms of academics, career, but at the same time, the psychosocial, emotional skills to be able to handle it as well and to use that knowledge in a useful direction.
Great, thank you. I love this idea of sort of psychological immunization and building in the same way the body builds up a set of immune responses through challenge. And we also can do that psychologically. I think that's an emotional. I think it's interesting. Let me spread the conversation here a little farther. Let me turn to Laura in Ontario. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your work and your perspective on this.
Thanks very much. So when I heard the topic was going to be around developing resilience in young children, my mind immediately switched into classroom teacher mode, and I started to wonder, how does that translate to the classroom? What might it look like in our classroom settings? And so, yes, because I'm from Ontario, I naturally went to the Ontario Kindergarten Program, which was released in 2016. And I know that this program was built on a document called How Does Learning Happen, which is a framework guidance document for childcare. So we have that nice continuity going across the early years. And just a little bit of context around the kindergarten program. It's child-centered, play and inquiry-based program that goes across 2 years. So one of the foundational beliefs in this program is the view of the child, because we know that the way that educators think about the child is going to provide the foundation for the kind of pedagogy and learning experience that they're providing. So in the kindergarten program, all children are seen as competent, capable of complex thinking, curious, rich in both experience and potential. So I started to think about educators who hold that belief of children and who treat children as competent and capable and curious and rich in potential and experience. And I really think that holding that belief about children is going to lead to giving children more trust. You're going to be able to empower children, give them time and space, allow for some risk-taking, messy learning from mistakes. And then children develop that trust and confidence in themselves. And they're able to pursue their own interests and explore their curiosities. And they're in a safe place. So they know that if something doesn't work out the way that they thought it might, they can go back and try another approach. And so they develop that perseverance. And so that's where my mind went. And that's what I wanted to offer into the conversation at this point.
Great. So there's kinds of spaces and the beliefs that we hold and the risks in particular that we allow kids to take in order to build their resilience, just as we've been talking about it, like an immunization. Great. Let me switch to Monica. So you don't have to kick Bill under the table to speak here. So let's get your perspective on this. Obviously, certainly in one piece, I don't know how much this plays a part in your story, but as a competitive figure skater, you clearly had to have some resilience. Talk about getting back up. So give us your thoughts on this and how it relates to your own work.
The idea, obviously, of skating, the first thing we teach children is how to fall down and how to get up. And that works with tiny little children and a little bit more difficult with adults, but it certainly can work. The idea of resilience or grit or abilities to have a belief in yourself, to know who you are. Like Laura was saying, a child is competent, a child is a blank slate to be filled. And with the resilience training, we look at how we are able to calm the child, work through any trauma, have an ability to have response ability so that when they are frustrated, that in the resilience piece, we're teaching them how to respond differently. We often, with little children in our families and in schools, with high expectations, high academic achievement, the pandemic, all any kind of sexual or battering trauma, these children come into school with their executive functioning full of anxieties and distractions and so forth. And so with the mental health training and through therapy, we're looking at, or even through the schools and the social emotional training, it's really looking at how to really look at the anxiety, to be able to cope with the calming and mindfulness and focus, and then from there be able to have different responses, to be able to concentrate, to be able to do their fun, leisure, and different activities that they're able to get back to. So working with the calm and back to homeostasis. So we're looking at different responses that children can have in frustrations, but also creating the calm and ability internally so that they can get back to their tasks or concentration at a quicker rate than being able to be distracted for longer periods of time.
So one piece of this is recognizing that, of course, not everyone, all children come to us as, whole and healthy. And part of the work is to help them deal, essentially, give them tools to deal with the trauma and the anxiety. I know that the anxiety, for example, has been shown to increase in huge amounts, not just during the pandemic, but in general, I think, in response to society's demands. And when I was thinking about songs to play, I was thinking about that tub thumping song. I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never going to keep me down. So it's a great party song, but I didn't think it was quite the right one to play here. All right, let's move now. Helen, bring you into this conversation as well. I know that you have done a fair amount of work around mindfulness, and in particular, that seems like something that would connect to how one deals both with the trauma or the challenges that children bring, but also helps all of us move forward.
Yes, so I've been working in the field with mindfulness for about 15 years now with teachers and parents and young children. And like all of you, I have a passion around helping children develop this toolbox that they can take with them through the ups and downs of life, which we all know everyone has, and different circumstances make things harder in some places or different in some places. And so my work around mindfulness is looking at how we can provide these tools and integrate them into our classrooms to make children have opportunities to know how to focus, to know how to calm themselves down, how to self-soothe, how to be empathetic and compassionate towards others. So my doctoral research, I looked at 7 preschools in Hong Kong, which is a very academically stressful country. I lived there for many years, so that's why I picked Hong Kong. And I looked at what those stressors were and how they were affecting children. We know very young children were committing suicide from academic pressure, and the situation seemed to be getting worse. So we implemented a mindfulness intervention into the 7 preschools and asked parents, teachers, and the children themselves, of course, to give us feedback on what they noticed and observed. And we found that, not only did the children become calmer and feel more relaxed and more focused, have more kinder outlooks, but the teachers themselves said they felt more kind and more calm and more present in their classrooms. And I think a lot of this discussion around resilience or around mindfulness and all kinds of social emotional learning, we really need to look at the adults and how we're modeling that. I think is one of the really important things, and that's what research has shown as well, is that's one of kind of the key ways that we can impact the kids, is by sharing our own experiences and modeling that ourselves.
Great, thank you. I'm reminded of the work here in Madison, Wisconsin, right where I live, basically, of the Center for Healthy Minds, Richard Davidson, the amazing work he's done, which has extended into the work of young children. It didn't start out that way, but the tremendous impacts that they've seen from mindful practice in children, both academically and around relationships and emotion. So let me just summarize real briefly a couple things I've heard and then ask a question. One thing that I've heard is that it's important to have a philosophy of education that includes the importance of these kinds of skills and thinking, as opposed to simply going for academic excellence. That we are able to teach skills to be calm and present. That we need to deal with the trauma that children may bring to us, or whether that's large or small or whatever, that kids, and also that we need to allow for risks, allow kids to try and to fail or whatever, and to keep going, as opposed to a very protective sort of environment. I'm curious, Helen, you just mentioned adults and modeling, and certainly in my work, I believe that there is probably no greater impact on children than the actual models. Do as I say, not as I do, for example, being the opposite of what I'm talking about. What kind of work do adults need to do to be able to not simply be purveyors of resilience, as it were, but to model this? And we'll take that, answers to that question from anyone who has thoughts about it. And I'll urge you just to, jump in. Don't try to be too polite. Just jump in and say what you want to say.
Well, I think for teachers in particular, we know that it's such a high stress job, and we have record number of teachers leaving the field. So I think, particularly around mindfulness, if we can bring that into teacher training, or we can offer it to teachers, they will then have those resources that they can share with the kids. I think there's more and more research coming out showing a mindful teacher has, without doing anything else, the classroom becomes calmer and there's less anxiety and more kind of kindness and compassion. And I think as adults, if we talk to children and tell them, how we're feeling, I'm starting to feel a little bit worried. I'm going to take a deep breath in. Do you want to all join me? And make it just something that's normalized, that we all have these feelings and emotions, and that we have the strategies and we share them as we go throughout our day.
Yeah, this sense of vulnerability that teachers can show, that they're not the authorities in front. Yeah. I believe it was James Baldwin. I'm not going to say this quite right, but young people have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they've always been perfect at imitating them. So, yeah, good. Anybody else want to add to this particular question or area?
I would like to jump in and just layer something a little bit on top of what Helen was saying as well, about the need for educators to also engage in mindfulness practices, because I believe that a lot of people who do engage in mindfulness get to know and understand themselves a lot better as well. And one of the things that we're doing a lot of talking about right now is the need for a more culturally relevant and responsive approach in the classroom. And that often begins with educators going inside and starting to identify some of their biases, particularly the ones they didn't realize that they had, but realizing that they have these biases and then working on those in order to be more inclusive and accept the diversity of children or students in their classrooms. So I really want to also jump on that bandwagon of let's get everyone trained up in doing some mindfulness practice in order to strengthen our own self, because we know that if we're an educator who has a much better sense of who we are and what's important and where our blocks and obstacles are, we can help to overcome that and then present that to the children with whom we're working.
So mindfulness, but also with sort of an equity lens as well. How do our own biases affect this? I think this is something that's become very important over the last couple of years in the United States in particular. I mean, before that as well, but it's taken on sort of a new urgency to it. And the time for teachers to do that work in safe and careful spaces seems to be really important in how they work with kids. Anything to add to this from the Nicoll household?
Yeah, well, I'd like to jump in just for a second, because what Laura and Helen just were talking about, I'd like to step back and kind of follow up. That's important, but we also need to put it into the larger, a larger picture here. When you look at the research on resilience, and there's quite a bit out there over the last 20 years or so, really comes down, there are 4 building blocks to resilience. And we have to make sure we're cognizant of all 4 as we try to approach the subject. The first thing we find associated with developing resilience is the availability of supportive, nurturing, I call them social ecosystems, the family, the school, and the community. When fish, flowers, animals start to die, we don't ask what's wrong with the animal, we say what's wrong with the ecosystem. What nutrients does it need? What toxins do we need to remove? Children the same way. We tend to say with children, what's wrong with the child? How do we fix them? Let's say, let's step back and make sure this is a healthy ecosystem. And that's the first place. That comes down to school culture, classroom climate kind of things, what we're talking about with teachers, and how healthy is the teacher and what their degree of resilience would be. So we've got to look at that and ask, in the business field, in the research on business, organizations, research on effective schools, all come up with one conclusion. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Don't talk to strategies if you haven't dealt with the culture. You can't take the child out of an unhealthy culture, give him a new skill and send him back in and say he'll be healthy now. No, we got to look at that. The second thing we find associated with resilience is development of essential social emotional competencies, what we're calling social emotional learning, which includes mindfulness and other things. That's also important in the curriculum, and it's a teachable skill, but we teach it 2 ways. That's kind of said by the previous speakers. We can directly teach it, but we also teach it with every movement, every breath we take, every move we make. I'll get into Sting here for a second. They're watching us, and we teach it by what we model. So we need to be including that 4th R as a teachable skill in the classroom. The third component, I've called the third building block, or third cornerstone, is developing a growth mindset. The work of Carol Dweck and others looking at how to develop that sense that, no matter what goes, I can always get better. That means we have to unlearn some things, such as the counterproductive effects of praising children. That's a fixed mindset. You're wonderful. Oh, shoot, now I have to live up to it. You're the best. Oh, my God, now I have to live up to it. That's as bad as saying you're stupid and you're inadequate. Focus on effort, progress, improvement. And so developing a growth mindset starts with changing how adults talk with children. It's not teaching them how to have a growth mindset while I talk from a fixed mindset. It also touches on the mental health field. We're loaded with all sorts of labels. Sort of what's famous psychiatrist who developed the DSM manual said, wrote an article called "No Child Left Undiagnosed." We've really reached that point where actually under the current criteria, 80% of the population is diagnosable with at least one mental health disorder by the age of 20, which makes abnormal psychology the study of mental health, because they're abnormal. If we lose this kind of model, it's got crazy. And the fourth building block is opportunities to experience a positive self-identity. And here again, and I won't get into all the different components of that, but a sense of equality, a sense of connectionness, a sense of competence someplace. One of the best programs I've seen for developing resilience puts kids in, several of them, puts children in a providing service rather than receiving service. That's a position of power. I can make a contribution to this world. I've got something to offer. And it's so easy to get out of that. But I've seen that with young children. I've seen it with adolescents, substance abuse programs, so forth. If we change that, so there's four different components. And if you're going to talk about developing resilience, we got to talk about all four. And so I'd leave it there. That let's look at the whole perspective and say how are we addressing each of these issues, and teachers and parents getting on board saying, yeah, what do I need to know about doing that? How am I doing that? How am I saying it, but then doing something quite the opposite? Because as you said at the outset, children learn very nicely. They're always watching what we tell them, not necessarily listening to what we tell them.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate the sort of grounded quality of what you're saying, that these are not just philosophical responses, but rather things that people can gauge their own work by. I'm wondering if, because I believe in my own work with children of young teachers and parents as well, people are looking for hands-on sort of responses, which these certainly include, as well as other things we've heard. Are there other very specific examples or kinds of ways that you all would recommend people consider their own relationships with children and how they might assess their ability to impact resilience? Or have we covered it all and we can say goodbye?
I'll add a little bit to that. I think, speaking very practically, I've always found working with storybooks using bibliotherapy as being, one of the best ways to introduce these kind of ideas into the classroom and start discussion with children, as well as using puppets and persona dolls in a kind of day-to-day setting, and looking at the characters or the puppets and bringing discussion points about what's happening in the kids' actual lives, or maybe even in the teachers' lives, and discussing it in that way. I think also because I'm very focused on working with the mindfulness, using the breath and finding fun and interesting ways for children to connect with their breath. I brought a little, this Hoberman sphere. I don't know if you've seen it before, but this is kind of a very visual way for young children to learn, about how their lungs expand in and out with each breath, and use this as a tool to practice creating their own breaths with different animals and things, but learning to use that breath to calm down when they need to focus when they need to, and then other things like movement, being in nature, and just noticing little things and being able to see how things are resilient in nature. If we take care of a plant that maybe isn't doing so well, and we tend to it and take care of it, it can bounce back, and then bringing that back to us, and that we can do that too. So those are just a few practical ideas.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate, as an artist myself, the importance of the first thing you talked about, storybooks. I'm wondering if you have, if I can build on that a little bit, let's call it 4 different storybooks or stories that, or two, or whatever comes to mind, that you would recommend as good jumping off points for discussion with kids around this topic?
Yeah, for me, my favorite of all time is Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, Very Bad, No Good Day. I think that's a great one to share. And I actually have a book here that my friend just published called Ali Raj and the Difficult Monster, which is a really great little storybook as well. So
yeah,
would be mine too.
Thank you. Thank you. You mentioned mindfulness and the breath. Are there other, again, sort of practical things that other panelists here might recommend for parents or for teachers to ways to build these skills?
Sure. I didn't think I was talking about skating this morning, but why not? Why not? Right. So a lot of times, like bouncing off what Helen said, was kids on the learning curve. When, there's a lot of young kids, you see their high frustration with their abilities and how fast they pick things up. And very quickly when they're in the classroom, they know who has the best shoes and who's the smart kid. And then they line themselves up in the classroom and at home as well, if they have more siblings or there's high pressure if they're only children. But so the mindfulness and the pause in between the thought. So when someone looks at a skill or something that they're learning, skating or guitar or math, which can be horrifying to young children, is making peace where you are on the learning curve, that you are fine where you are. I believe in myself. I know that tomorrow I'll be better and I can develop skills and I can continue to improve. So pausing, breathing, using the breath, and having the ability to recognize that I don't need to compare to Johnny or Fred next to me. I'm okay as I am, and I believe in myself. And I'm okay if I learn a tiny bit slower than the one next to me. That's a very, very different piece and very difficult piece. I have two books that I finished a couple years ago, Key to Calm and Key to Chivalry. And it really, the knight Thomas really struggles through learning to be a knight and then learning social emotional competencies. And it's both of them are fairy tales, learning how to overcome adversarial positions and getting off the learning curve and believing in yourself. And how the dragon, which is your negative thoughts, can come into play and really take you off your best. And learning how to tame the dragon. And he makes friends with the dragon and his negative thoughts, and learns to use them in a way to move forward, to propel him in a way to believe in himself.
Great, thank you. And I would also, there are certainly many, folk tales, well chosen, but Bedelheim talking about the importance of those stories and the way they fit with our psychic architecture, where you see resilience over and over again in the heroes. Yeah, Laura, anything you want to add in here?
I did, thank you, Stuart. So I'm also thinking about those caring and responsive relationships that we know are those sort of outside supports to help children develop resiliency. And I'm thinking about, as a parent or as an educator, when you engage in the child's play, not as the lead learner or the person who knows it all, but as a co-learner, and you allow the child to have a lot of voice and choice and direction in where that play goes, and you're alongside them, engaging with them, you're learning more about the child as you learn with and from the child. So I think that's a really important thing as well, be it in the home or in the school, that adults enter into play with the child, but allow the child to steer the ship.
Yeah, that we're not the authorities, although we're supposed to be. That's right.
If I could just add a piece onto that, we've done a lot of work with that. In fact, I've just put out a series of about 25 different classroom activities with parent follow-up to it. Our parents can do it themselves. teaching the skills, social emotional competencies they need for life. And I think it's so important when teachers put this in the classroom, when parents do it at home, or best yet, it's in the classroom and there's homework assignments for the parents to do at home with their children. So we're all talking the same language around children. But, you know, from my own background, I started out in the teaching field, and I realized the best way to learn something is to have to teach it. I've only had good handwriting once in my life. It was those years as I had to teach kids how to write. The rest of the time, something goes with the nerve between my brain and my hand, and it goes back to the old way. When you teach something, when you have to teach children about empathy, when you have to teach children about mindfulness, self-calm, emotional self-regulation, how to communicate in a positive way, how to contribute to solving problems, and so forth. As we're learning these things and we're teaching it, we develop the capacity ourselves. So it's a very synergic kind of dynamic goes on there when we have parents and teachers developing their skills by teaching the children. We all learn from it. But there are definite lesson plans you can do. We do a lot of them. I started doing it 40 years ago. And that was along in my career. That I can feel the pain and the seizure in my heart as I'm saying that. It's been a long time. And it's magical what happens with kids when you start teaching these skills. And you can teach things about great people who failed. Isaac Newton, terrible student, failed in school. Actually, the parent took him out of school. Thomas Alva Edison. You have a long history of people who didn't make it. Gilbert Chesterton in England. Terrible. His teacher told me his open brain would only find a lump of white fat. Became the most prolific author in the Western world. So kids start to see there's hope, and I can struggle. And yeah, I might be, as Monica said, the kid who's ahead this week. But down the road, Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. He wasn't good enough. So these are the kind of things kids need to be talking about and be developing and saying, you know, hang in there. You never know where you're going to go. But they're teachable lessons in a lesson plan format. But again, kids need healthy organisms, healthy ecosystems. So we need to develop in the classroom with the teacher. You need to develop at home, and we need to all be talking on the same page. However, that said, historically, we've tried this many times, at least since the turn of the century, the turn of the other century, the 20th, from the 19th to 20th. We've had national programs, we've had international programs. People talk about developing character education more early, and we've done it wrong every time. Or we've talked about it and we don't implement it. There's a book by a man named Cuban called The Black Box of the Classroom. A lot of programs go in, then they close the doors. You don't know what actually happens in there. And sometimes it doesn't get implemented and so forth. So how do we develop those in a way that we get everybody really on board? I think that, like most things in education, it only comes when the parents insist on it. Every change in education has come from the parents and community saying, we want this for our children. It doesn't tend to come from the institutions. Institutions are reluctant to change, and there's no bigger institution than the educational institution. It's a monster. So we've got to get people from the outside saying, let's work together and do this.
So there needs to be, in a sense, an advocacy on parents and the community at large's part. And I want to come back to something that you said, Bill, earlier. It was a great analogy that I hadn't heard before, which is, you know, when the flower is dying, flowers, or when the fish are dying, you don't say what's wrong. I mean, you might, but it's also possible that there's a much bigger picture going on. How do we think about that without making this too sort of depressing and global? You know, we live in a world in which this these are not necessarily the values of the world at large, what we're talking about here today, except as they relate to success. So, for example, when you talk about, well, Michael Jordan was cut from his high school team. Well, in the end, he became Michael Jordan. And somehow that becomes the goal, is rather than just sort of the successful person who isn't even on the basketball team at all, if you understand what I mean. You know, how do we think about this in sort of the biggest picture here, the values of society, as opposed to the kinds of things that we're talking about here? And there clearly is sort of a diametric opposition if you look at the way things actually unfold.
You got me thinking in 5 different directions there, and I'm trying to remember what the first one was.
What do we do in a world that's so messed up? That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, you know, really what we're talking about, the resilience, and we get so focused on disorders and disabilities and dysfunctions. We're always dissing children. There's got to be something wrong with you. And what we don't talk in the mental health field, this has frustrated me. This is my 50th year in the mental health field. And it bothered me from the start, and it still bothers me today. The only thing people in mental health don't know is anything about mental health. We study psychopathology. We study disorders. And if you ask, so what is mental health? You're going to get a blank stare. Damn, it's when you're not mentally unhealthy. Well, no, I said 80% of the population now, according to our manual, is unhealthy. And what we're talking with resilience is, how do we teach mental health? And like anything we teach, we're not just talking about the child who's having difficulties in it. You know, the good math student, we take him where he is and take him to the next level. The weak math student, we take him or her where she is and take him to the next level. In resilience, mental health, the strength to get through life, the skills, we're talking the same thing. Every child can be moved forward, and that needs to be part of our overall curriculum. And that way we find actually a transcultural kind of perspective, that there's certain aspects of it goes back to Tolstoy's opening line and his book, and I just draw a name, but his book, he says, healthy families or happy families all look the same. Unhappy families are each unhappy in their own unique way. And we find that with kids, into mentally healthy, well-adjusted people across the borders all look the same. Unhappy, healthy cultures all look the same, a healthy aspect. Unhealthy ones, everybody's got their own unique version. So let's get focused on, I said before, the 4 building blocks, those essential social emotional competencies that everybody needs in any culture. How do we teach those? And interestingly, when you look at the folk tales, fairy tales of different cultures, when you hear what they admire, what's a healthy individual, what's a admirable, they all look the same. Tolstoy was right on target. Healthy people, healthy, well-adjusted kids all look the same. They have a certain essential component. That's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Let me just pause for a moment. We have about 9 minutes left. We said we would devote some of this time to questions. I have one question here in the chat. Actually, there showed up another one. But I think I could probably guess the answer. But would you recommend schools adding a mindfulness lesson in their timetable? And I think we might just have a thumbs up on that one. And I'm not sure. And I've seen here in our discussion some of the different kinds of ways. Clearly, there are resources out there, trainings for teachers, books, things like that for how to do that. So I'm going to move on to the next question here, which is, and this is a big one. My wife is a teacher and works in an elementary school here, and the tremendous amount of anxiety the teachers themselves are feeling in this, in particular, the pandemic, although I don't think it's unique to this time of crisis. The anxiety of the rising expectations. We could make a long list. I don't need to. What can schools do to help reduce or confront or nurture responses to the anxiety that teachers are bringing into the classroom on a daily basis?
I think in regards to that, it kind of also ties into the question above. So if you're a very anxious teacher, maybe going in and teaching a mindfulness lesson is not the best the best thing. So for the first question, I would say, work on a teacher's own mindfulness practice and bring in mindful moments throughout the day. So using the breath at transition times, or using a bell, just practicing bringing in some more noticing and awareness. And then for teachers' own anxiety, I think it would be, I know I'm a very big proponent of this. I think it would be wonderful if schools, like school culture, as William was saying, could come together and create that environment where it's okay to talk about these things, because a lot of schools, teachers feel uncomfortable even admitting that they're overwhelmed and anxious, but creating the spaces for teachers to have that calm area, that calm space where they can perhaps practice some mindful practices or use mindful tools, and collaboration. I think, knowing that you're not alone and that there's a shared humanity there, whether it be, in your own school, or even between parents and teachers, or, in a wider environment, but connection and sharing with others, I think that I have found has been a really wonderful thing to help teachers know that they're not abnormal, that this is something that many teachers face, and give ideas about how to practice self-care, how to manage their emotions on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, clearly the opportunity to, not just say it's okay, but to actively acknowledge and make space for that. And this is really critical, and as opposed to what I think many administrators are offering, which is essentially soldier on. We're just keep going, right? We don't have time to talk about this. Anybody want to add to that question? I think we have a couple more questions, and our time is running pretty short here.
Jump on that just for a second. That's something for school administrators to be doing. So we talk about teachers with children. The school administrators, you're setting the tone for your school. Someone once said that a school administrator is like a choir director. You set the tone before they speak by hitting the key. We're going to sing it here. And so doing things like recognizing we need time to do mindfulness. Athletes don't start an event until they put on their headphones, they block everything out, and they relax their bodies and their mind. Kids, teachers need that. We need to be talking about these things. Administrators need to be, I talked earlier about a growth mindset. Communication with my staff needs to be focused on being a talent scout. Where are we doing something? How are we handling this? We're getting there. We're improving. Yes, it's difficult. But I'm going to be your number one cheerleader on the side, not the angry fan in the stands yelling what you did wrong. This is tough. If you're not anxious, you're not paying attention. That's what's going on right now. It's tough. It's tough as it is anyhow being in a classroom, let alone in these kind of times. So I think that sort of changing the mindset of the school administrator is an important factor. What can you do to help them create this a positive school culture, a supportive culture, supportive feedback systems? And sometimes just we need to take some time out. I guess we can't drink. That's inappropriate to when you're in the classroom. But at least some mindfulness, some relaxation training, whatever it needs to do to kind of say, we're going to get through this together.
Yeah, I think about, I worked in the International School of Zurich, and they have a wonderful early childhood program there. Laurel Sutcliffe was the director, and parents would, come, very expensive school, very high-end school. And she would say, if it's important to you that your child knows that their ABCs by the time they're 5, this is the wrong school for you. And she was able to say that, directly. And they had trees there, and they let children climb the trees, and a child fell and broke his arm. And the question was, are we going to now not let children climb the trees? And she said, of course, we're going to let them keep climbing the trees. And that's a tremendous amount of courage and support from, above as well, to be able to make those kinds of statements. A wonderful learning atmosphere. So we have about a minute left before I need to just wrap things up. Anybody dying to, wrong word, but anybody who really wants to say something to finish things up? I think we've had a wide-ranging discussion with lots of practicality. Anybody want to add anything before we need to end? Okay. Well,
just looking at one of the questions on here. It says, what did I mean by culture eats strategy for breakfast? Strategies are the techniques. The mindfulness is, Helen mentioned, but if the teacher is uptight and negative person, that's going to eat mindfulness for breakfast. We've got to have the techniques, but you've got to also look at the culture and the environment. And what kind of a tone am I setting here? We can't look at these individual pieces separate. It all comes in together. And so we need to be mindful of the whole broader picture. Take a wider angle lens and say, now we can go back and talk about the social emotional competencies, emotional self-regulation, teaching kids empathy, teach them to communicate in an effective way, teach them how to problem solve and make a contribution. But we also have to have a positive, empowering
Yeah,
classroom
great.
culture, and so forth.
And another word for culture in that sense, you might substitute relationships. The relationships we have are what make the teaching possible, not the particular academic approach. So great, thank you. I want to, on behalf of Beacon House, I want to thank all of you for joining us virtually here. And thank the audience as well for tuning in from wherever you are. And they're apparently on the website, wherever you have signed in from, there is a button to click in which you can provide feedback, and that feedback will help improve future events and sessions. So having said that, just thank you to everyone involved here, and I believe that concludes our session. See you later.
Thank you, Stuart.